Okay. All right. Let's give it a shot. Welcome to lesson 2. This is where really starts to pick up. No more models, no more measurements. Just you, me, a pencil, and some paper. Over the next few lessons, our goal is to create the infamous sloper set, or as referred to by some, a block set. For this stage, I recommend setting yourself up in a quiet room all by yourself with a large table or an open floor. You do not need any distractions, trust me. There are many different methods to create a sloper set. For example, there's the Bodice method. There is the Aldrich method. For this course, we will be focusing on the Helen Joseph-Armstrong method. That's right, the infamous one, in my opinion, which you should take with a grain of salt. It is confusing, it is frustrating, but it's beautiful. And if you do it right, you'll see that too. The question you're probably asking yourself is, what the is a sloper? Fair. A sloper is the master or working pattern that all of the designs we're going to be making together can and will be derived from. Trying to design without a sloper set is like trying to paint on a wall that has not been primed. It just doesn't look right. The standard sloper set that you would draft in almost every fashion school, or here with me for free, almost always begins with drafting the basic dress foundation. The basic dress foundation consists of 5 different pattern pieces. There is the bodice front and bodice back, there is the skirt front and skirt back, and then of course there are the sleeves. By creating a sloper set that fits, you're ensuring that all future designs you derive from it will fit just as well. Hello, it's me in a new outfit because this is a different day. Please listen to the following disclaimers before trusting me with your precious time. Disclaimer number 1. This method of drafting is for adult female figures. It is not for men's wear. It is not for children's wear. If you try to do this for either of those, you're going to end up with something which does not fit at all. Disclaimer number 2. The sloper set that we're going to be working on today will not fit your model if you cut it out as is, sew it together, and try to put them on it. In the next lesson, we're going to be adding seam allowances, truing darts, doing all of that jazz to turn this working pattern that we're drafting today into something that's actually wearable for the test fitting. Disclaimer number 3. The traditional sloper set, the one that we're going to be working on here, is intended for woven fabrics only. This means that if you try to use stretch or knits or wool for that matter, it just won't fit. These require entirely different considerations when it comes to adding ease. Disclaimer number 4. Oftentimes, your first pass at a sloper won't fit perfectly. But worry not. The goal is to get as close as possible and then to alter it after the model wears it for a test fit. Great designers can draft a perfect sloper, but even greater designers can fix a broken one. Disclaimer number 5. There are so many ways to draft a bodice, so many methods, so many theories, so many types of bodices. The Helen Joseph-Armstrong method is just one of them. It is not the right way, it is not the way, it is not the only way, it's just a way. But if it's not your cup of tea, don't worry, it's fine. It's not most people's, and we will cover the other methods in due time. However, if you are in your first year of fashion school, and somewhere around you, you can see a pattern making for fashion design textbook, unfortunately, my dear, this video is for you. Anyways, enough chit chat. Let's see what tools are needed to get started. Tools. Similar to lesson 1 measuring, there are very few tools which are needed to draft a pattern. Thank God. Thank God. You will need your measurements from lesson 1, so if you have not seen that, whoa, partner, pause right there. Go and take a watch, mark everything down, and then come back. I'll see you in a jiff. You will also need a pencil, some tracing paper. I recommend getting A0 or as large as you can because you need to make sure you have enough space for the bodice. So before committing to paper, hold it up, and if it doesn't cover half of the front or the back of your model's body, then there's no way that it's going to be big enough to do this. A ruler, this one is flexible and clear. I recommend getting one kind of like this, but any ruler will do just fine. A pair of trusty scissors. Do not use your scissors on tape, pro tip. And finally, some sort of French curve. This will help with the neckline and the armholes when we get to them. And that's it. That's all you need. Let's get into it. Welcome to the drafting table. We have our paper relaxed out and weighted along the edges. Actually, in this case, we have it taped. Either will work fine. You can, of course, buy tracing paper with grid lines already laid out on it. However, it's oftentimes twice as expensive, and if I'm being honest, I just couldn't find it anywhere. Instead, what I do is I use this wholesale parchment paper, which is much cheaper, still semi-transparent. It comes in every single size imaginable. Plus, you can bake with it. Assuming you're like me and you do not have fancy schmancy paper, we need to begin by adding our own vertical and horizontal guidelines. Now that that's complete, we have everything ready to draft. Some of the measurements that we're using, we're going to be adding some extra length to. We call this ease. Now, what is ease? Why is it important? Well, if we took the measurements as they were when you took them, whatever you were to create out of those measurements would be so form-fitting that it honestly probably wouldn't even fit. So for certain key measurements like the full length or the spans or some of the arcs, we want to add a little bit of ease. And of course, I will be telling you when and where we're going to be doing this. To start, begin by adding 3 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch ease to your full length measurement. This will determine the total height of the garment from the waistline all the way up to the high point shoulder. So that is the lowest point of the bodice to the highest point of the bodice. I'm going to be doing all of this in reverse. So let's see how that works. I would recommend starting at one of these bottommost corners that you've marked out and measuring up in this type of way. Mark the topmost point, point A, and the bottommost point, point B. Point B is going to be the start of the waistline, and point A is where the high point shoulder line will eventually be. Next up, we're going to do the opposite. Subtract 3 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch ease to your across shoulder measurement. With that measurement, start at point A and go horizontally across and mark that new point, point C. This determines the total width of the top of your garment. Now what we want to do is draw a guideline straight down vertically, approximately 7.5 to 8 centimeters long. This isn't really a measurement, it's more to help guide us later on in the drafting process. Starting from point B and measuring up towards point A, yet again, you want to place your center length measurement, which will be slightly shorter, and this will determine where the bottommost point of the neckline falls. Mark this location as point D. Square yet another guideline across from D horizontally, about 10 centimeters or 4 inches. And the final part of the blocking phase for the bodice front is to incorporate our bust arc measurement. We want to add 6 millimeters or 1/4 of an inch to the bust arc measurement and measure starting from point B horizontally across the bottom of the waistline and then mark that measurement as point E. This measurement helps determine the full waistline measurement of the bodice. You guessed it, we need a guideline. The guideline is the longest one we're going to use. It's anywhere from 25 to 30 centimeters or, ballpark 11 inches up from point E towards point C. This guideline will help us in determining where our side seam falls. We're going to add a 3 millimeter or 1/8 of an inch ease to the shoulder slope measurement. And if you remember the shoulder slope measurement, we measured from the waistline at center front diagonally across the body all the way up to the shoulder point. So what we're going to do is the exact same thing with the paper pattern. We're going to start at point B, which is the waistline at center front, and measure diagonally across the bodice front until we intersect with the guideline at point C. Wherever your measurement intersects with this line is where you need to mark the newest point, point G. This intersection right here is your shoulder point. That's another way you can think about it. Now we're going to stay here with this line that we just drew, and using your bust depth measurement, remember this was the one that started at your shoulder point and went down towards the apex of the bust, we will do the exact same thing, starting here at point G and measuring down this line back towards point B. Mark the new point, wherever it may fall, as point H. This is the location of your model's bust apex or nipple. Using your shoulder length measurement, in the same way we placed this diagonal line, we're going to place one that goes from point G to the line connecting points A and C. Wherever your measurement ends and lines up with this line is where you should mark your next point, point I. This is your high point shoulder, and this line is your shoulder seam. Now, square a line down from point I until it intersects with the guideline you drew from point D. Make sure that when you're squaring it from this angle, not from A to C, from I to G. So you can see this line is not straight up and down, it's slightly at an angle. What you're starting to see here is the beginnings of the neckline, albeit quite a geometric one. However, you can start to see the form taking shape. And that is pretty exciting. Now we're going to move back down to the center of the bodice front. And we want to square a line from point H all the way to the center front. Let's start there. We want to mark this intersection right here as point J. This is your bust level. Starting from point J towards point H along this line, we want to measure out our bust span measurement plus 6 millimeters or a 1/4 inch of ease. Now, this might very well extend past point H, and that is totally fine. If that's how your model measured, that's how the bodice will draft. It's really important when watching YouTube videos about people drafting patterns like this that you're not trying to get your final result to look exactly like the one I have, because this is based off of a completely different person's set of measurements. No two bodies are the same. What's important is that you understand the relationship between these measurements, why we mark them out the way we mark them out. So again, if this line or 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 any of the lines don't line up with each other exactly the way you're seeing here, that is no cause for concern. Every pattern requires some sort of alterations or fittings, and we will get to that in due time in a future lesson very soon. Mark this new point wherever it falls as point K. Now, what we want to do is measure the distance between points D and points J, and then mark a point that is perfectly in the center between the two. This halfway point between D and J will be labeled point L. Now that we've marked point L, we have our chest line. And what we would like to do on this chest line is measure from point L horizontally across your across chest measurement plus 6 millimeters or approximately a 1/4 inch of ease. This new point should be point M. From point M, you will also create a guideline vertically up and down. This will help us in the future when it's time to draft out the armhole of the bodice. With your dart placement measurement, measure from point B to point E. Mark this point wherever it may fall, then square down 1/2 centimeter or 3/16 of an inch and mark that as point F. The first thing you want to do is add 3 millimeters or a 1/4 inch of ease to your strap measurement. And then starting from point I right here, similar to all of the other diagonal measurements that we've done, the exact same way we measured it, we want to go diagonally across the bodice front until we reach the side seam at the waistline. Then mark that point N. From point N, we want to take our side length measurement and measure up this guideline. Mark that new point, point O. Next, we need to measure out a slight extension, anywhere from 3 to 3.5 centimeters or about 1.25 inches, and then mark that new point as point P. Super quick note here, depending on your model's cup size, the extension from N to P will actually vary. So here's a quick chart to help you decide which extension is the correct one for your model. You can also download this in the description if you want to save it for later. Made with love. Now, the same distance between point N and point O, this is your side length measurement, we want to measure that same distance from point O in the direction of point P. Now, for any of you trigonometry mathematicians out there, when we make this line at an angle, it will not meet point P, and that is okay. It's not supposed to. Actually, mathematically, that's impossible. You can't do that. You can't do that. So we're going to get as close as we can. Next up, you need to draw a guideline from right here above point P at the end of this new line straight to point F, right at the bottom of this extension that you had just added. This is the foundation for the dart that we're going to be adding shortly. Now, you might be asking, if you are an astute listener, why did we change the side seam to be at an angle? Well, that's because the front bodice requires a little bit more material than the back bodice to actually reach the side seam. Therefore, by incorporating this slight angled extension, we're ensuring that when the garment is worn, that the side seam does line up perfectly on the side of the model. That's it, that's all. Holy moly, it looks like a whole lot is going on in this page, and it sure as is, but fear not, because we're almost done. We're gonna have to use a little bit of logic here, and if you have to pause the video and rewind it, please do so, feel free. In order to understand how to place a dart, we need to first understand what a dart is. Fabric falls flat, and that does not account for the natural curvatures in the body. Fabric wants to remain two-dimensional. So some genius one day decided, let's force the fabric to be three-dimensional. We have a two-dimensional bodice piece right here. This triangular cutout is the dart. If I were to put this on somebody's body, imagine it were actually fabric, it would fall down straight and there'd be a lot of draping and it would not be snugging the body in the slightest. By sewing these two edges together, the pattern piece lifts up. Essentially what we're doing is we're forcing form into a two-dimensional object. This is the power of a dart. And then if we look at this new pattern piece, all of a sudden, there's almost this conical shape to it. And that's simply by incorporating this dart. This conical shape is in essence what allows it to cup around somebody's breast, or if you're dealing with a skirt, around the butt. This is what allows fabric to look nice around curves on the body. And that's what we're going to be adding here today. Now, if we look at this pattern piece right here, all of this space right here is technically negative space because when we go to construct the bodice, we're going to bring these two edges together. And it's what these two edges being together creates that is the waistline. This whole thing is not the waistline, only the two pieces when they're sewn together. So when we're determining the dart placement, we need to take into account for this negative space. Now that we've established what a dart does, we need to figure out how to correctly draft it. So let me just draw something up really quick. This is what we're making, the bodice front. And this is the dart we were just chatting about. These, the long sides of the triangle, are called the dart legs. But we don't need to see all of this. Let's just focus on the part that matters. Just gotta sketch out some transitionary frames. Let's add our point label so everything is clear. Now, we've already marked the start of the first dart leg. That's actually point F. All we need to figure out now is point Q, the start of our second dart leg. And to figure this out is actually quite simple. Let's collapse the dart so we see the waistline as it'll be sewn. Actually, that looks a little... One sec. Much better. This is the waistline of the garment. We need to determine its total length before proceeding. To do this, take your waist arc measurement and add about 6 millimeters of ease to it. We'll call this the eased waistline. Now, as mentioned before, we know what the distance between F to B is since we already drafted it. So let's just measure that from our pattern and write it down somewhere safe. This is what that measurement looks like. Now we need to figure out the distance of P to Q. Well, that should be pretty straightforward. If we just subtract the distance between F and B from the eased waistline, whatever remains should be the distance between points P and Q. In other words, if you add the P to Q measurement to the F to B measurement, you should get the total amount of your eased waistline. Starting from point P, measure your new value down the guideline towards point F. Mark that new location as point Q. You've now marked the beginning or the intake of the second dart leg. Now, when you sew the dart closed, the waistline will be the correct length. From point K, begin by drawing a straight line to point F. Measure the length of this line and draw one of equal value from point K towards point Q. Now, this might extend past point Q, and that's totally normal. The most important part is that both dart legs are the exact same length, since we'll be sewing them together. Mark the new point R. What you're seeing now is the foundation of the dart. However, there's one issue with it. The dart extends all the way up to the bust apex, and this creates a couple of problems. The first is the appearance. If the dart extends all the way to the model's nipple, it will accentuate that area and make it appear almost pointy. The second is the comfort for the wearer. Not all, of course, but many people's nipples are quite sensitive. Fixing this, however, is straightforward. We will drop the bust point ever so slightly. To do this, mark a point 1.5 to 2 centimeters down from point K, but make sure it's perfectly centered between the dart legs. From this new marking, redraw the dart legs to both point F and point R. Now this is the finalized dart. All that's left to do is finish the waistline by adding a slight curve. So get your curve out, and ensuring the flat side is perpendicular to the side seam, draw a curve from point P to point R. Do the exact same thing with the flat side perpendicular to the center front to draw a curve from point B to point F. And this is your finished waistline. There is only one more step left. It's time to draft the armhole and the neckline curve. Let's start with the armhole. Using your curve again, draw an armhole that starts from point G, this is your shoulder point, touches the guideline at M, your mid armhole, and ends at point O, the very top of your side seam. It's important that the curve ends as perpendicular to both the shoulder seam and the side seam as you can get. This will ensure that the front and back bodice pieces line up well with each other when we finally sew them together. And voila, your armhole is complete. Time for the last line, the neckline. So keep your curve out and connect points I, your high point shoulder, and point D, your neckline at center front. Same as the armhole, we want our neckline to be as perpendicular as possible to the shoulder seam and the center front. And that, my friends, is the completed bodice front. Let's cut it out and save it for the next lesson. We have a back bodice to draft. Welcome to the bodice back. Now, the bodice back looks incredibly similar to the front, but there are a couple minor exceptions. First of all, the neckline will appear much shallower, and instead of using one dart, we are going to be using two. One at the waistline, the other at the mid-shoulder seam. So grab a piece of tracing paper, mark out your guidelines like before, and let's get started. Now you will notice the order in which we draft the back bodice is incredibly similar to the order in which we drafted the front bodice. We are going to start with the back full length measurement. Pick one of the vertices on the grid lines that you drew right around here at the top. Mark that as point A. And with your back full length measurement, measure vertically down that line, and wherever your measurement ends, mark that as point B. Now we've determined the full length of the back bodice. We need to determine the width at the top of it. Using your back across shoulder measurement, start at point A and measure horizontally and mark the new point C. Now we're going to square a guideline down from point C, just like with the front, anywhere from 7 to 8 centimeters or approximately 3 inches is fine. Return back to this vertical line that we just drew, and starting from point B towards point A along this line, we want to measure our center back length measurement. You're going to mark that new point wherever it falls along this line as point D. And now I'm going to go grab a little cup of tea. I'll be right back. Daisy tea! Now, just like with the front, yet again, we're going to square a guideline out horizontally from point D about 10 centimeters or 4 inches. Take your back arc measurement and add about 1.5 to 2 centimeters. I'm going to do 1.9 centimeters. And measuring from point B, go horizontally across the bodice and mark that as point E. Now you guessed it, we need to add a guideline that goes vertically up. This will help us determine where our side seam falls later on. This guideline should be about 20 centimeters, 25 centimeters, I don't know. We're going to start up here around the neck area. First, what you want to do is take your back neck measurement and add about 3 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch ease to it. Then measure from A towards C and mark wherever your measurement falls on this line as point F. It is time for the shoulder slope section of this bodice. So we're going to start at point B, and you want to add 3 millimeters, again, or 1/8 of an inch ease, to your shoulder slope measurement. Measure diagonally across the bodice towards the guideline coming off of point C. Wherever your measurement intersects with this line, at whichever angle, is where you should mark the next point, point G. Next, we're going to figure in our shoulder seam. So starting from point F right here, you should take your shoulder length measurement and add anywhere from 1 to 1.5 centimeters of ease. And you want to measure from point F through point G. It very well might go past point G. That is totally fine. You're going to mark this new point, point H. Once you've drawn this line, it's time to square a guideline from F down to the guideline at D. This is the rough foundation for your back neckline. We're going to come back to these a little bit more later, but for now, let's roughly block in where our darts are going to be. If you remember earlier, I mentioned the back bodice actually has 2 darts, traditionally speaking. For now, let's just block out where the waistline dart is going to be. Starting at point B, measure your dart placement towards point E. Mark this new point as point I. From point I, measure about 4 centimeters towards point E, or about 1.5 inches, and mark that as point J. That will be your second dart leg for the waistline dart. That's a K. That's a K now. I f***ed up. That's a K. Now, measure the distance between the two. In our case, it was 4 centimeters. You want to cut that in half and mark the middle point between the two as point L. Now we need to decide where along this line the waistline meets the side seam. So what we want to do is take our back waist arc measurement, add the distance between point I and point K, as well as an additional 6 millimeters or 1/4 inch of ease. Then, from point B, with this total number that you just added up, measure towards point E. Wherever you fall, mark that as point J. This is where your side seam will meet the waistline. From point J, square downwards approximately 5 millimeters. This is a very, very small amount of distance. Only 3/16 of an inch. How stupid does that sound? Mark that new point in a teeny tiny letter as point M, because we're running out of space. And now the same way we did it with the front, starting from point M, which is right here at the bottom of the extension, we want to measure diagonally to this guideline from point E, our side length measurement. Wherever your side length measurement intersects with this guideline is where you should mark your next point, point N. With your side length measurement from before, subtract 2.5 centimeters or about 1 inch from it. And draw that new amount vertically up from point L. This will determine how tall the back waistline dart is. And mark this as point O. From point O, we're going to draw 2 two new lines, one towards point K and one towards, you guessed it, point I. Both of these lines should extend approximately 3 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch past these. Ta-da! Oh my god, oh my god, what the am I thinking? Can you even imagine? That would have been so bad. Oh, that could have been so bad. I would have lost my shit. Now that we've drawn in these dart legs, we need to connect points M and K and points B and I. We'll do this the same way we did it with the front, with a slightly curved line. You can use a French curve or a hip curve for this. It really doesn't matter. Whatever you have the means for, hun. Now, you might remember earlier on I mentioned that the back bodice piece has not one, but two darts. One of the darts is at the waistline, and then we add an additional dart up here at the mid-shoulder seam. This shoulder seam dart is quite important because it's what allows the back bodice piece to wrap around the round of the back or the shoulder blade. Now, we said mid-shoulder seam, which means we want to place it perfectly in the center of the shoulder seam. So measure the distance between F and H. This is your eased shoulder length measurement. At the exact midway point, place your mark, point P. Now we need to draft the length of this mid-shoulder dart. So from point P, measure 7.5 centimeters or 3 inches in the direction of point O. Label that new point as point Q. Just like before, we need to measure out where the dart legs of this mid-shoulder dart are going to be. On either side of point P, make a mark about 6 millimeters or 1/4 of an inch away. You can mark them R and R prime. And yeah, we could have said S, but we're going to use S for something else because that's the way that Helen Joseph-Armstrong did it. And from point Q, we want to draw the dart legs not to, however, through both points R and R prime by about 3 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch. Measure the distance between points Q and R and mark a dart leg that is the exact same length from points Q through points R prime. All that remains is connecting points F and R and points R prime and H. Now we need to decide where our across back measurement is going to fall. This across back measurement is ultimately what allows us to draft the back armhole. In order to find that location, measure the distance between points D and point B. This should be your back center length measurement, and divide it by 4. With that new number, measure from point D towards point B and mark that as point S. From point S, take your across back measurement and add approximately 6 millimeters or 1/4 of an inch to it. Then, with that new value, measure from point S horizontally across the bodice back and mark that new location as point T. And you guessed it, we need a guideline. All that remains is drafting the neckline and the armhole. This is going to be a lot of fun. Best you believe me. Let's begin with the armhole because that one is the most difficult. Using your curve, draw a line connecting point H, this is your shoulder point, to the guideline on point T, this is your mid armhole, all the way to point N, which is the top of your side seam. Remember, it's important that the armhole is as perpendicular to the shoulder seam and the side seam as possible if we want it to flow and blend naturally into the front bodice piece, which we just drew. Well done on the armhole. All that's left is the neckline. This is the final line, not only of the back bodice, but of this entire lesson. So make this line count. Using your curve, draw a line connecting point F to the guideline here at point D. We want the entry point of the neckline at point F to be perpendicular to the shoulder seam, and of course we want the center back neckline to also be as parallel to the ground as possible, so that way there's no jagged pattern pieces. Now it's time to cut this out. Let's get it done and move on to the testing phase of our front and back bodice pieces. I will see you there in just a second. Now that you've drafted out both the front and the back bodice pieces, there are a few tests that we need to run to ensure that everything lines up nicely. The first test is the shoulder seam test. So take both your front and your back pattern pieces, line up the shoulder seams like so that way the high point shoulders, right where the neckline starts, is touching. The first thing you'll notice is that the shoulder on the back bodice piece is slightly longer than the shoulder seam on the front bodice piece. This is in part due to this dart right here. When we sew the back bodice piece together, we're going to close that dart so we can disregard it in calculating the length. With a marker or a pen, whichever of your choosing, mark where this first dart leg starts on the front bodice piece. Just a little dot will do. This is our indicator of where the shoulder dart will be located. Now what we can do is shift this back bodice piece so the second dart leg now touches that little dot, and this simulates what it will be like when that dart is closed. Now we can see if the pieces line up, and they in fact do. If you do this exercise and you find out that one side is longer than the other, what you want to do is measure both of these lengths and compare it to the actual measurement on the measurement sheet. Whichever one is closest to the measurement you took is the correct one, and the one that is further away from the measurement that you took is the incorrect one. Now, if the incorrect one is too long, you can cut the excess at the shoulder point and blend it into the new armhole. And if the wrong piece is too short, you can add extra material by taping a new piece of paper underneath and marking the shoulder seam extension, and then re-blending the armhole accordingly. Now that the shoulder seams have been tested and we know that they're the same length, we need to check the armhole and that it blends at the shoulder seam. So we're going to tape these shoulder seams together. And if you look, the armhole's a little bit jagged. It's not smooth. It doesn't have that coveted 90-degree angle that we want right at the shoulder point. So we're going to take a ruler and blend those two curves into each other and cut out the marking so that way it creates a nice smooth transition from the front bodice piece all the way to the back bodice piece. Similar to the shoulder seam, we need to ensure that the side seams are the same length because they're going to be sewn together. So you want to line up your side seams, that way the waistlines are touching here at the bottom. And you'll notice that the bodice front piece is slightly longer than the bodice back piece. Very, very slightly, but you can see it. It's unmistakable. In this scenario, what we're going to do is first tape them together along the side seams so the pieces don't move around. Just a few small little pieces will do the trick. And we want to mark where the difference is. So if the back bodice piece, let me zoom in here a little bit. We're going to make a little mark on the front bodice, right where the back bodice piece lines up. And what I'm going to do is blend this into the curve that already exists. So either A, I can do it freehand, dot, 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 make a couple dots, and then cut off that, or I can use my actual curve, which I recommend you do as well, because it'll be smoother and slightly more accurate. So we've found a spot on the French curve which cuts off this additional fabric right here and blends in really nicely right around the bottom of the armhole. So I'm going to mark that with a pen. So now I've marked this new section, and I can hatch this so we know that we're going to cut it off. And then with a pair of scissors or a rotary cutter or with your bare teeth, you're going to cut that piece off. And bam, it might look like a very small amount of material that we cut off. And yes, that is true. That is correct. But it does make a big difference. And it's these small little changes that really, really make a garment something special. Additionally, it's better to make this change now than to have it be something that compounds down the line as you design the garment. Now, remove your tape. And you can either save it for later or eat it as a late night snack. Oh, and it already looks so much better. I mean, holy shit. Take a look at that. So this test was kind of 2-in-1. Not only did we make the side lengths the exact same on the front and back, but we also smoothed out this armhole. These are equally as important. We also want to do the same thing for the neckline. So adjust your pattern pieces again so the side seams are touching. Right here at high point shoulder is where we want to line them up. And you can tell pretty quickly that the neckline is quite smooth, actually. I don't have a complaint in regards to this. But let's say there was an angle or a piece of paper kind of jutting out here. You would do the exact same thing that we just did for the armhole. You'd tape it right here along this shoulder seam. You would take your curve and blend it so that way it's a smooth curve from front to back. Mark that with a pen, and then with a trusty pair of scissors, a rotary cutter, you can cut it out and make it nice and smooth again. This is also important for comfort. You don't want to be wearing something and have a little triangular piece of fabric tickling you in the corner of your neck. That sounds like a torture method. We have now tested every single aspect of this bodice to ensure that the front and the back are cohesive. It is really easy when drafting these pieces to get so zoomed in on one or the other that we forget that they are a unit. They need to be used together. The front bodice is only as good as the back bodice allows it to be, and the same goes for the back bodice to the front. We need to make sure that they are harmonious, from the neckline to the shoulder seam to the armhole to the side seam. Boom! Okay, that's the testing stage. Done! It may not look like much right now, but I assure you it is everything. The freedom you're going to feel when this is done and it fits well, and you realize that you never have to buy another pattern ever again because you have the only one you'll ever need, at least for that model. In the next episode, we'll be taking the bodice block that you just made and converting it into a bodice pattern, which we will then cut out of fabric, construct, test it on our model, and alter the fit. If you don't own a sewing machine, now is probably a good time to go and buy one. But if you don't, it's not the end of the world. I spent the first year sewing with my hands. I didn't have a machine until quite recently, actually. Whoa. So it is possible. It will absolutely incinerate any of your free time. But oh, the character it will build. Anyways, it's time to go to bed now. My wrists are sore and my mind is numb. You probably relate if you made it this far in the video. So take a shower, go brush your teeth, go the to sleep, go the to bed, and I will see you all in lesson 3. Thank you. Goodbye. Closing time. That's enough. Lights off, cameras off. Shut it down. Get the out of here. Get the out of my house. What are you doing in here? You shouldn't be listening to this. Go the to sleep. I'll see you in lesson 3.